Elias Grange had been walking through the desert for hours, his canteen long emptied, the sun beating down with merciless intensity. He had done this many times before, but today something felt different. The endless sand dunes stretched before him, the heat rising in waves off the ground. His boots dug into the soft, shifting sand with each step. The desert was beautiful, but it could also be deadly, and Elias was feeling the toll of his journey. He had been searching for something, a hidden oasis rumored to be somewhere deep in the desert. But now he wasn't sure if he had the strength to continue. His head ached, his throat burned from thirst, and the exhaustion was starting to cloud his mind. The worst part was the silence. The wind barely stirred, and there was no sign of life anywhere. It felt as though the world had forgotten him. Just when Elias thought he couldn't go on, he saw something ahead. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a trick of the sun. But then he saw it again, a figure lying in the sand. His heart skipped a beat. Was it another lost soul like him, or someone who needed help? With whatever strength he had left, Elias stumbled toward the figure. As he got closer, his eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't a person. It was a woman, but not like any woman Elias had ever seen before. Her skin glowed with a soft, silver hue, and her features were sharp, almost otherworldly. She was dressed in strange clothes that didn't seem to belong to Earth, and her long dark hair shimmered as if it was made of starlight. Elias's first thought was that she might be dead. There was no sign of movement, but then he noticed something. She was breathing, shallow but steady. He knelt beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea who she was or how she had ended up here, but he couldn't just leave her to die in the desert. He quickly took off his jacket and spread it over her body, trying to shield her from the intense sun. His hands shook as he checked for any signs of injury, but she didn't appear to have any visible wounds. She was just unconscious, lying there as though the desert had claimed her. "Hey," Elias called softly, tapping her gently on the shoulder. "Are you okay?" There was no response. He felt her forehead for warmth. She was burning up. She needed water. Desperation crept into his thoughts, but there was nothing he could do. His canteen was empty, and the nearest town was miles away. He looked around, feeling a wave of panic. The desert was unforgiving, and without water, they were both doomed. Then he remembered the shelter he had passed earlier in the day. A small cave, barely visible from the main path, but it might be enough to shield them from the heat. With the last of his strength, Elias gently lifted the woman into his arms. She was light, almost weightless, but he struggled under her weight. He staggered across the sand, focusing on the distant shadow of the cave. His vision was blurry, and he felt dizzy, but he pushed on. Every step felt like a battle. When he finally reached the cave, Elias carefully laid the woman down on the cool, rocky floor. He collapsed beside her, gasping for air, his body covered in sweat. His mind raced with confusion. Who was she? How had she ended up here? He took a moment to catch his breath before looking at her again. Despite her strange appearance, there was something about her that seemed familiar. He couldn't place it, but her presence didn't feel threatening. Instead, it was comforting, as if she was a part of something much bigger. Elias grabbed a small cloth from his bag and wet it with the last of his water, gently wiping her face. He had no idea how long she had been out here, but he knew she needed help fast. He couldn't let her die like this. After a few minutes, the woman began to stir. Her eyelids fluttered, and she groaned softly. Elias quickly moved back, unsure of what to expect. She opened her eyes, and for a moment, they locked on him. Her eyes were a striking shade of violet, deep and luminous, like the stars in the night sky. There was an intensity in her gaze that made Elias feel as though she could see right through him. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice weak but steady. It wasn't a language Elias recognized, but somehow he understood. Her tone was calm, almost serene. "I'm Elias," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "I found you out there in the desert. You were unconscious. She blinked slowly, as if processing his words. Then, she attempted to sit up but winced, clearly in pain. Don't try to move, Elias said quickly, reaching out to help her. You're not in any condition to. She held up a hand, stopping him. I'm fine, she said, her voice stronger now. Thank you for helping me. I don't know how to explain. Elias frowned, still unsure of what was happening. What happened to you? Who are you? She took a deep breath, her violet eyes softening. My name is Lyra. I am not from here. I was stranded. My ship crashed. Elias blinked, shocked by her words. You're not from Earth. No, she replied, her voice calm but filled with sorrow. I'm from a place far, far away, a distant star system. I came here seeking something, but I failed. Elias stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. She wasn't from Earth. She was an alien. He didn't know whether to be terrified or amazed. Elias sat on the cool stone floor of the cave, staring at the woman who had introduced herself as Lyra. Her eyes, still the shade of deep violet, looked at him with a quiet intensity, as though she were trying to gauge whether he believed her story. And in truth, Elias was having a hard time believing it. An alien from a distant star system. It felt impossible, but here she was, sitting in front of him. For a moment, the cave was silent. The only sound was the distant whistling of the wind outside, but it felt like the entire universe was holding its breath. Elias wiped his sweaty palms on his pants, trying to think of something to say, but nothing seemed right. What did you ask an alien who had crash-landed on Earth? Where exactly are you from? Elias finally asked, his voice hesitant. I mean, what's your home world like? Lyra blinked, her expression softening slightly. It was clear that she wanted to explain, but her struggle with language was evident. Her brow furrowed as she thought carefully, clearly trying to find the right words in a language she didn't fully understand. I come from the stars, she said slowly, her accent soft but melodic. Far beyond the clouds you see at night, beyond your moon. Elias nodded, trying to process her words. It was hard to imagine. The thought of a place beyond the stars, a place so distant that even light would take years to reach it, was beyond anything he had ever thought possible. He tried again, a bit more directly. How did you get here? To Earth. Lyra paused, her eyes glancing down at the ground for a moment as if reliving a painful memory. My ship malfunctioned. I tried to fix it, but the power system failed. It crashed. Elias saw the sadness in her eyes. She wasn't just lost. She was stranded, and she didn't seem to have any way to return home. I'm sorry, he said softly. He didn't know what else to say. Lyra didn't seem upset by his sympathy. She gave him a small, weary smile. It is not your fault, she replied. I knew the risks when I left my world. But I never imagined something like this could happen. Elias felt a pang of guilt, but there was still something puzzling about all of this. You said you came here looking for something. What was it? Lyra's face grew serious. I am searching for an energy source, something that could save my people. My home is dying. Our star is fading, and without the energy I seek, we will not survive. Elias blinked. This was much bigger than just a crash. This was a desperate mission, a race against time. Lyra wasn't just an explorer. She was a survivor, fighting for the future of her species. Is there any way I can help? He asked, genuinely wanting to do something. He couldn't just sit back and watch someone suffer, especially not someone who had helped him survive the desert. Lyra's eyes softened, and she reached out with one of her pale hands. It trembled slightly, but when she placed it on Elias's arm, it felt as if there was a deep connection between them, one that transcended words. You already have, Elias, she said. By helping me, you have already given me a chance. Her words were kind, but they didn't ease the heavy feeling in Elias's chest. He wasn't sure what he had done to help her, but he knew he couldn't turn away now. He wasn't sure what came next, but whatever it was, he would face it. The conversation had only scratched the surface of the many questions swirling in Elias's mind. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each of them lost in thought. The silence was peaceful, but the weight of the situation hung in the air, unspoken. After some time, Lyra took a deep breath and spoke again, this time with more urgency. "Elias, you must understand," she said, her voice tinged with the seriousness of her situation. "I have no way to repair my ship. Without help, I cannot return home. And the energy I need, it's here, somewhere on this planet. But I cannot find it alone." Elias felt a chill run through him. He had heard rumors of strange objects and ancient relics hidden deep within Earth's jungles and caves. Could this energy source be one of them? Could there be something buried here on Earth that held the key to saving an alien race? "You need me to help you find it?" Elias asked, his heart pounding in his chest. The idea seemed unreal, but he could see the desperation in her eyes. Lyra nodded. "Yes, you have a connection to this world. My people, we were never able to understand Earth. But you have the senses of this planet. You can feel things I cannot." Elias didn't fully understand what she meant, but there was something about her words that stirred something deep within him. Something beyond curiosity. He couldn't ignore it. The idea of helping her, of being part of something so much bigger than himself, made his pulse quicken. Before he could say anything, Lyra reached into a small pouch she had with her, carefully pulling out a smooth, glowing crystal. It was small, no larger than a marble, and it shimmered with an ethereal light. She held it out to Elias, her expression serious. "This," she said, "is what we need. It is the key. It is the energy I seek, but I cannot activate it alone." Elias took the crystal in his hands, and the moment his fingers brushed against it, he felt something strange, a warmth, a pulse of energy that seemed to resonate within his very bones. He looked at Lyra, confused. "What does it do?" he asked. Lyra's eyes sparkled. "It will change everything," she said softly. "It will change you." Elias wasn't sure what she meant, but he had a feeling that his life, as he knew it, would never be the same again. Elias stared at the glowing crystal in his hand, his fingers gently wrapped around its smooth surface. There was an almost magnetic pull to it, as if the stone was alive, humming with energy. The moment he touched it, a strange warmth spread through his body, and his heart began to race. The crystal's light flickered, casting an eerie glow on the walls of the cave, and Elias felt as though the entire world around him was shifting, becoming more vivid, more alive. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. He had no idea what was happening, but there was no denying the strange sensation coursing through him. It felt as if the crystal was reaching deep inside him, touching something he couldn't understand. Lyra watched him carefully, her violet eyes filled with both hope and caution. "It is the key to my people's survival," she said softly. "But it is also much more than that. It is a gift, and it can only be given to someone who is willing to accept it." Elias looked up at her, confused. "A gift?" His voice trembled slightly. "Why me? Why are you giving this to me?" Lyra took a deep breath. "Because you are the one who helped me. You saved me. And now you are the one who can help save my people. But there is more. This gift, it will change you. It will awaken something inside of you that has been dormant for as long as humanity has existed." Elias's mind raced. He wanted to understand, but the words seemed too big, too impossible to grasp. "What do you mean by change me?" he asked. "How can this little stone do that?" Lyra's lips curved into a soft, sad smile. "It is not the stone itself, Elias. It is the power within it. The crystal contains the energy of 1,000 worlds, and it can grant the one who holds it abilities far beyond what you can imagine. But only if you are ready." Elias shook his head. "I'm not ready for any of this. I'm just a guy who wandered into the desert." "You are much more than that now," Lyra said. "You have already begun to change. I can feel it. The moment you touched the crystal, something inside you awakened." Elias looked down at the glowing crystal once more, his fingers tightening around it. He could feel the warmth deep inside him now, pulsing with every beat of his heart. He could hear a faint hum in his ears, like a distant song, one that felt both foreign and familiar. It was as if the crystal was calling to him, pulling him toward something. "What do I do with it?" he asked, still unsure if he was ready for any of this. "You must accept it," Lyra said. "The crystal is part of you now. You must allow it to merge with you, to become a part of who you are. But be warned, Elias, the gift is powerful. It will not just change your body, it will change your mind, your soul. It will make you see the world differently. You must be prepared for that." Elias took a deep breath. He wasn't sure if he was prepared for anything, but he had no choice. Lyra had given him this gift, and there was no turning back. He could feel its energy calling to him, urging him to act. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let Lyra down. He had to do this. Slowly, he closed his eyes and held the crystal to his chest. The warmth spread through him instantly, flooding his veins with a strange, electric sensation. He gasped as his entire body seemed to hum with power. His muscles tensed, his heart raced, and his mind was overwhelmed with a flood of images. Images of distant stars, alien landscapes, and strange, ancient technology that defied all logic. The visions were so vivid that it felt like they were real. He could see himself standing on alien worlds, surrounded by beings of light, wielding unimaginable power. He could feel the energy coursing through him, reshaping him, turning him into something more than human. And in the midst of it all, he felt Lyra's presence, calm and steady, guiding him through the overwhelming flood of sensations. "Let it happen," Lyra's voice echoed softly in his mind. "Trust it." Elias tried to hold on to his thoughts, but the energy was too overwhelming. He felt as though he was being torn apart and rebuilt piece by piece, and just as suddenly as it began, the surge of power stopped. His breathing was heavy, and his body felt like it had been pushed to its limits. He opened his eyes and looked down at his hands. They were the same, yet not the same. His skin felt different, as though it had been touched by something beyond the earth itself. He could feel the power inside him, swirling just beneath the surface, ready to be unleashed at a moment's notice. It wasn't just physical. It was mental and spiritual. He felt connected to something far greater than himself. Elias stood up slowly, his legs trembling. He felt as though he had been reborn. But there was no time to focus on how different he felt. He had a purpose now, a mission. He turned to Lyra, who was watching him with a mixture of awe and concern. "Are you all right?" she asked. Elias nodded, though he wasn't sure if he could trust his own voice. The power was still buzzing within him, and he didn't yet know how to control it. "I think so," he said, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. "But I feel different, in ways I can't explain." Lyra smiled. "You are different now, Elias. The gift has chosen you. And now you must choose how to use it. The power inside you is both a blessing and a curse. It will help you, but it will also test you." Elias took a deep breath. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't go back to the way things were. The path ahead was uncertain, but he would face it with the strength and power that now flowed through him. And as he looked at Lyra, he knew that together they would face whatever challenges came next. The world had just become much bigger than he ever imagined. Elias stood in the cave, his mind still reeling from the incredible transformation he had just experienced. The energy inside him was like a storm, swirling and crackling, waiting for release. He could feel it now. Power, real power, coursing through his veins. It was as though he had become something more, something different, but still, at the same time, very much human. He didn't know how to control it yet, but he could sense that it was always there, just under the surface. He looked at Lyra, who had been silently watching him, her violet eyes filled with both concern and pride. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sense of urgency that Elias couldn't ignore. Elias swallowed, trying to steady his breath. He nodded. "I think so." Lyra nodded back, but her expression was serious. "We have no time to waste. The energy you've accepted is only the beginning. We need to find the source I've been searching for before it's too late." "Right," Elias said, the reality of the situation starting to settle in. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about saving an entire species, an entire world. He wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was clear: his life had changed forever. Lyra stood up, gathering the few belongings she had with her, including a small device that looked like a strange piece of technology Elias had never seen before. She activated it, and a holographic map appeared in the air, floating between them. The map showed a series of locations, some marked with bright red dots, others with yellow ones. "This is where we need to go," Lyra said, pointing to the map. "These are the places where the energy is strongest. We must visit each of them, starting with this one." She pointed to a red dot near the edge of the desert. Elias looked at the map, then back at her. "What's there? What are we looking for?" "A power source," she replied. "A relic from an ancient civilization. It's the last piece of the puzzle for my people." Elias frowned. "An ancient civilization?" Lyra nodded. "Yes. A long time ago, my people encountered a race of beings who had mastered energy, far beyond anything we can even imagine. They shared their knowledge with us, and we built our civilization on that power. But now, our star is dying, and without the energy we need, we won't survive." Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The idea that an ancient, advanced civilization had once visited her people was beyond anything he had ever thought possible. And now, it seemed as though the key to saving them was hidden somewhere on Earth. "So, where exactly do we start?" Elias asked, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. Lyra looked at him, her face serious. "We'll need to find the entrance to an underground facility. It's hidden beneath the sands. That's where the first relic is." Elias felt a thrill run through him. An underground facility hidden beneath the desert sands. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. He was already committed, and there was no turning back. "Let's go," he said, determination in his voice. The journey through the desert was exhausting. The heat pressed down on them like a weight, and the endless sea of sand stretched out in every direction. Elias could feel the power within him, buzzing faintly, but it wasn't enough to make the journey any easier. His legs were sore from the long walk, and the water he had left was barely enough to keep them going. Lyra, however, seemed unaffected by the harsh conditions. She moved with ease, her eyes scanning the horizon as if she knew exactly where they were going. Elias admired her focus, but he also felt a growing sense of unease. The desert was full of hidden dangers, and the further they went, the more he felt like they were walking straight into something they couldn't control. They finally reached the area marked on Lyra's map, and Elias could see that it was an isolated part of the desert, devoid of any signs of life. No plants, no animals, nothing but the swirling sand. Lyra stopped, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the area. "We're close," she said. "The entrance should be here." Elias looked around, but all he saw were dunes and empty space. "How do you know?" "There's nothing here." Lyra smiled, a faint hint of mystery in her expression. "I can feel it. My people have a connection to the energy. It's like a sixth sense. It guides us." Elias didn't fully understand, but he trusted her. They began to walk around the area, carefully searching for any signs of the hidden entrance. After what felt like an eternity, Elias's foot struck something hard beneath the sand. He paused, crouching down to dig. Slowly, the shape of a metal door began to emerge. "This is it," Elias said, excitement growing in his chest. He dug faster, and soon enough, they had uncovered the full door. It was old, covered in layers of sand and dust, but still solid. Lyra knelt beside him, her fingers brushing the surface of the door. "This is it, the entrance to the facility." Elias felt a rush of anticipation. They had found it. But as he looked at the door, a sense of unease crept over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lay behind it was not going to be easy to handle. Still, he knew they had no choice. Lyra stood up, her voice steady. "Are you ready?" Elias nodded. "Let's do it." Together, they began to open the ancient door, revealing the dark, mysterious path that lay beyond. The air was cool, almost damp, and the faint hum of energy could be heard echoing from within. Elias took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway that led deep beneath the desert surface. The air inside was cool and stale, carrying a strange metallic scent. Elias hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. They had come this far, but the darkness beyond felt thick, almost alive, as though the very walls of the facility were watching them. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, like beacons guiding the way. Elias followed, his breath coming in shallow bursts as his mind raced with questions. What was inside this ancient facility? What secrets would they uncover? And most importantly, what would they find that could save her people? The passage was long and narrow, stretching far beneath the sands, and as they walked, Elias could feel a strange sense of tension building in the air. Every step seemed to echo, louder and louder, as if they were trespassing into a forgotten world. The hum of energy grew stronger the further they went, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. Lyra was silent, her focus unwavering as she led the way. Her eyes darted from side to side, seemingly in tune with something beyond the physical world. Elias could feel that connection between them growing stronger, though he didn't fully understand it. There was something about the way Lyra moved, so sure and confident, that made him trust her implicitly. Eventually, they reached a large chamber. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, alien markings that Elias couldn't even begin to decipher. At the center of the room stood a massive cylindrical structure, its surface covered in intricate patterns and strange, shifting lights. It pulsed with energy, casting an eerie glow across the chamber. Lyra approached it slowly, her fingers hovering just above the surface. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to something only she could hear. Elias watched her, his curiosity growing. This was the heart of the facility, the source of the power she had been searching for. "This is it," Lyra whispered, "the source of the energy. The relic my people need." Elias stepped forward, reaching out to touch the structure. The moment his fingers made contact, the chamber seemed to come alive. The glowing symbols on the walls flared brighter, and the hum of energy grew deafening, vibrating through the air. Elias pulled his hand back in surprise, his heart racing. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the noise. Lyra's eyes flashed with recognition. "The energy is reacting to you," she said. "You've accepted the gift, Elias. You're connected to it now. The relic recognizes you." Elias could feel it now, too. There was a pull, a tug deep inside him, as if the relic itself was calling out to him. The power coursing through his veins responded, thrumming with an energy that was both foreign and familiar. It was like the crystal he had touched earlier, but stronger, much stronger. It felt like a force he could tap into, if only he knew how. Lyra stepped closer to him, her voice urgent. "You must focus, Elias. The energy in this room is powerful, but it's unstable. We need to harness it before it overwhelms us." Elias nodded, though he had no idea how he was supposed to do that. He had no training, no experience with this kind of power, but he knew he had no choice. The future of Lyra's people depended on him. He closed his eyes, focusing on the energy inside him. It felt like a storm, swirling just beneath the surface, ready to burst free. He imagined it settling, calming, directing itself in one focused, controlled burst. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, Elias felt the power surge through him. It wasn't chaotic or wild anymore. It was focused, like a beam of light shooting from the core of the relic and into his chest. The pain was sharp, like being torn apart and put back together at the same time. But he gritted his teeth and held on. He could feel the relic's energy merging with his own, becoming one. He wasn't just Elias anymore. He was something more. The humming of the chamber grew louder, and the glowing symbols on the walls flickered as the energy surged outward. Elias's hands began to glow with the same eerie light, and the relic seemed to pulse in response, its patterns shifting and twisting. Lyra watched in awe as Elias's body radiated with the same energy that powered the facility. She could see that the connection between them had deepened, and she knew that whatever was happening now was beyond anything either of them had anticipated. The relic was alive, and Elias had become its channel. "You're doing it," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "The power, it's stabilizing." Elias could feel the power flowing through him, but he wasn't sure how much longer he could control it. The energy was so intense, so overwhelming, that it was starting to feel like it might consume him. But just as he thought he couldn't hold on any longer, a sudden wave of clarity washed over him. The power was no longer something to fear. It was something he could use. He wasn't just a vessel for it. He was its master. Slowly, he lowered his hands, and the glowing energy began to recede, leaving only a faint glow around his fingertips. The chamber fell silent once more, the humming fading into a low, steady pulse. Elias opened his eyes, feeling both drained and exhilarated at the same time. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes wide with amazement. "You've unlocked the relic's power, Elias. It's stabilized now. You've done it." Elias looked at her, his mind still trying to process everything. "But what does this mean? What happens next?" Lyra's face softened with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "It means we have the power to save my people. The relic is now fully activated. With this energy, we can heal our star. We can return home." Elias felt a sense of pride welling up inside him, but also a deep uncertainty. This was only the beginning. There was still so much to learn, and so many dangers ahead. But for the first time since this journey began, he felt that they might actually succeed. Together, they had found the first piece of the puzzle. And the path ahead, though uncertain, was now full of hope. Elias sat on the cold stone floor of the ancient facility, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. The power that had surged through him moments ago still hummed faintly in his veins, but now it was quieter, more controlled. He looked at Lyra, who was standing across the room, her expression filled with awe and wonder. The energy from the relic was now fully stabilized, and for the first time in days, Elias allowed himself a moment to breathe. He felt different, more connected to the world around him in ways he couldn't explain. It was as if he could feel the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the currents of energy flowing through the air. He wasn't just human anymore. He had become something more. Something bigger. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "Elias, we've done it. You've done it. The energy is stable. My people will be saved." He looked up at her, meeting her eyes. "But it's not over, is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Lyra replied softly. "It's not. This is only the beginning. Now that the energy is stabilized, we must act quickly. There are still forces at work that will stop us, forces who want this power for themselves." Elias frowned, standing up slowly. "What do you mean? Who would want this power?" Lyra's eyes darkened, her expression serious. "There are those who believe the power of the relic should not be used to save my people. There are factions who want to control it for their own gain. They will do whatever it takes to stop us. Elias could feel the weight of her words. He had known from the moment he accepted the crystal that there would be risks. But he hadn't imagined that others would actively try to take the power from them. It was clear now that their mission wasn't just about saving Lyra's people. It was about protecting the power they had unlocked. "So, what do we do now?" Elias asked, his voice firm. Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, and she took a step toward him. "Now we must make a choice. You have the power to heal my people's star, Elias. But there are others who will stop at nothing to get to this energy. To protect it, we may have to fight." Elias's heart skipped a beat. Fight. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a guy who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. But now, with the power of the relic coursing through him, he felt like he had no choice. He couldn't let Lyra's people down. He couldn't let this power fall into the wrong hands. "I don't know if I'm ready for a fight," Elias admitted, his voice low. "I've never fought anyone in my life." Lyra looked at him, her expression calm but resolute. "You've already fought. You fought to save me in the desert. You fought to understand the gift you were given. You fought to keep going when the odds were against you. Now you must fight to protect the future of my people." Elias took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. It was true. He had fought in ways he hadn't even realized. He had faced impossible odds, and he had come through stronger for it. Maybe this wasn't so different. "I won't let anyone take this power from you," Elias said, his voice steady. "I won't let your people suffer." Lyra smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I knew you would understand." Together, they turned back toward the massive structure in the center of the room. The energy from the relic was still pulsing, though now it seemed calmer, almost welcoming. Elias could feel it, too, the connection between him and the relic, as if the power had become part of him. He wasn't sure how he knew it, but he felt it deep inside, like a second heartbeat. "We need to get back to the surface," Lyra said, her voice urgent. "We've stabilized the relic, but we must leave before we attract attention. There's no telling who might be watching us." Elias nodded. "Let's go." The journey back up the narrow passageway was faster now, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Elias's mind raced as he tried to process everything. He had accepted the power of the relic, and now he was tied to it. He could feel its weight in his chest, a constant reminder that there was no turning back. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no other choice. He had to protect it. He had to protect Lyra and her people. They emerged into the desert, and the heat of the sun hit Elias like a wave. It was a stark contrast to the cool, quiet air of the underground facility, and for a moment he closed his eyes, letting the sunlight wash over him. The desert stretched out before them, vast and empty, but it felt different now. The world around him seemed more alive, more vibrant, and it wasn't just because of the power coursing through him. It was because of what he had learned and what he had become. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to find the others. They're waiting for us." Elias nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's go." They began walking, their steps firm and purposeful. Elias could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him, but he also felt something else, something powerful. He was no longer just a wanderer lost in the desert. He had a purpose now. He had a reason to fight. As they walked, Elias's mind kept drifting to the choice Lyra had mentioned. There would be a fight. That much was clear. But he wasn't afraid. He had the power of the relic now, and with it, he was stronger than he had ever been. And he would do whatever it took to protect the future of Lyra's people. Together, they would face the dangers ahead. Together, they would fight for what was right. Elias and Lyra walked through the desert, the heat now unbearable as the sun hung low in the sky. The journey back to the small group of survivors would take hours, but Elias could feel something stirring within him, a sense of urgency that made every step seem heavier than the last. The relic's energy still thrummed inside him, its power now an almost constant presence. He was learning to control it, but he knew the battle ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, the sand shimmering under the hot sun, but Elias's mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the choice that lay ahead. The fight, the danger, the uncertainty. He didn't know what to expect from those who would come after the relic, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. Not when so many lives depended on it. "I feel it," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. "They're close." Elias looked at her, his heart skipping a beat. He could feel the change in the air too. The winds had shifted, and there was an unnatural stillness in the atmosphere. Something, or someone, was out there, watching them. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon, her hand resting on the weapon at her side. She had never told Elias much about her people's enemies, but he could see the tension in her posture. This wasn't just a group of bandits or scavengers. These were people who would stop at nothing to take what wasn't theirs. "We have to hurry," Lyra said, her voice steady but urgent. "The others are waiting. We can't let them get the relic." Elias nodded, his pulse quickening. He could sense the power of the relic inside him, a reminder that this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about protecting something much bigger than himself. They picked up their pace, moving faster across the sand. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert. The temperature was dropping, but the air was still thick with tension. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the silence, a crackle like static on a radio, followed by the sound of engines. Elias's heart raced as he looked over his shoulder. A convoy of vehicles appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as they barreled toward them. It was them, the ones who would stop at nothing to get their hands on the relic. Lyra's grip tightened around her weapon. "We have no choice. We'll have to fight." Elias didn't hesitate. The energy inside him was ready, almost eager to be unleashed. He had felt it before, the power that surged through his veins, but now it was different. Now it was more focused. He could feel the connection between him and the relic, as if the two of them were one entity. He wasn't just a human anymore. He was a force to be reckoned with. "They're getting closer," Elias said, his voice steady but low. "We can't run." "No," Lyra agreed. "We fight." The convoy was closing in fast, and Elias could see the figures of armed men and women moving with precision, ready for whatever came next. They were trained. They were prepared. But they hadn't counted on Elias and Lyra. Lyra turned to Elias, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of determination and trust. "Stay close to me. We fight together." Elias nodded, and they moved into position, taking cover behind a large rock formation. The convoy was almost upon them now, the sound of the engines growing louder. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as the adrenaline started to kick in. He wasn't sure how he would handle this, but one thing was certain. He couldn't let them take the relic. The first vehicle came into view, a large armored truck with men leaning out the windows, guns aimed at them. Without thinking, Elias reached out, his hands glowing with the energy of the relic. A wave of power surged from him, slamming into the truck with the force of a hurricane. The vehicle spun out of control, skidding to a halt as the men inside were thrown backward. Lyra fired her weapon, taking out two of the attackers with precision. Her movements were fluid, instinctive, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Elias could barely keep up, his mind still processing the surge of energy he had just unleashed. But he didn't have time to think. He had to focus. He had to stay in control. More vehicles appeared, surrounding them from every angle. The attackers were relentless, but Elias could feel the relic's power growing stronger within him, guiding him. His body moved with purpose, his hands crackling with energy as he deflected bullets and sent blasts of power into the enemy ranks. Lyra fought alongside him, her movements a perfect complement to his own. They were a team now, and the enemies that came against them were no match for their combined strength. As the final vehicle approached, Ilias could see the leader of the convoy, an imposing figure with a dark helmet, a scar running down the side of his face. He held a weapon that was unlike anything Elias had seen before, a massive energy rifle that crackled with raw power. Elias could feel the energy building inside him, a final surge that was ready to be unleashed. He locked eyes with the leader of the convoy, who raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Elias. Without thinking, Elias stepped forward, his hands raised in front of him. The power inside him erupted, sending a wave of force that collided with the leader's weapon. The rifle exploded in a shower of sparks, the blast knocking the leader off his feet. The remaining attackers hesitated, unsure of what to do. Elias's hands were still glowing, the relic's energy crackling around him like a storm. He wasn't sure how much more he could take, but he knew this was it, the final stand. With one last surge of energy, the attackers retreated, their convoy in ruins. Elias lowered his hands, his body trembling from the strain. The fight was over. They had won. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it," she said softly. "You protected the relic." Elias took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We did it," he corrected her. "Together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias looked out over the desert, the power of the relic still flowing through him. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, he felt like he was ready for whatever came next. Together, they had fought for something greater than themselves, and they had won.